Advanced TV Herstory, where hearty discussions of all things TV draws a smart circle around the women who've made it all happen. In each installment, we'll celebrate, educate, illustrate, or analyze, all in hopes of reaching listeners with the message that TV and women are very much a part of our lives, and we like talking about them. Revisit great moments or legacies of talented women. It's all a ticket to inspiration and aspiration. So find this podcast alongside the great ones at Core Temp Arts Network, at Libsyn, Google Music, iTunes, and Auto Radio. Engage with us on Twitter. Our handle is @TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Enjoy. Loyal listeners, it's been quite a year. In this special installment of Advanced TV Herstory, we're going to look back at podcast archives. Shows created since last summer. We're doing this for two big reasons. Okay, actually three. First, whether or not you listen to a lot of podcasts, there are maybe some episodes from this year, that you just didn't get to. So I'm going to explain why I chose them and hint a bit about the story. Second, subcategories and formats are really important to how I present this information. And there are reasons why you've never encountered another podcast like Advanced TV Herstory. And third, we really like to talk about TV and the women who contributed so much to it for 6 decades. Talking about it is fun and important. Every episode touches on feminist issues that are relevant today, but were championed decades ago by women in and of TV. But no one talks about them consistently. Sad. For me, the biggest highlights were the tremendous feedback that I received from listeners and fellow podcasters, and the fun professional engagement with people from academia, from the podcasting world, authors who I interviewed via largely remote technology. I hope you've enjoyed a smoother audio experience this year, due in part to the masterful work of audio technician David Brown and our use of a hotshot microphone. We are positively fancy. But as we look to our 3rd year, know this. My pledge to you remains exploring stories that dig deep into TV shows that featured memorable women characters and were produced or written or directed by talented women, as well as the occasional soapbox stand that raises the roof on representation and financial disparities in the industry. These are some of the biggest obstacles to progress. And while these gaps exist in every profession, their negative impact in the media is magnified. Because if our girls and teens don't see women as smart, valued contributors to society, either in the plots of the TV shows, or the delivery of the news, or the analysis and the commentary and the participation in sports, then they're going to have a really hard time seeing themselves in that light. In return, listeners, I will ask only this of you. Whether you subscribe or listen infrequently, you're in a unique position to recommend this podcast and discuss these topics with others, most likely the women in your life. And because each installment is rated clean, it is absolutely appropriate listening for people of all ages, and with technology can be accessed in ways that don't require numerous clicks and downloads. So please think about the women in your life who would enjoy not only reliving some of the best TV they ever watched, but hearing perspective about why there are valuable lessons to be discussed, and then discuss it with them. This is the power of technology. Okay, let's talk TV. In a lifetime of watching television, the calendar year includes few seasonal milestones that transcend dramas and comedies. While 40 years ago, shows would occasionally toss in an Easter episode. I think about The Brady Bunch and The Waltons as 2 examples. Mostly Halloween and Christmas or Hanukkah are the 2 likely holiday seasons that warrant special episodes. Advanced TV Herstory hasn't really found a Halloween episode that's a standout example of women in or of TV. So if one immediately comes to mind to you, please send it to me. Send me a note. I'm curious. This year, however, for the Christmas Hanukkah seasonal holiday, I selected the 1970 Christmas episode of the beloved Bewitched series, starring Elizabeth Montgomery. Actually, Montgomery not only starred in the show, and she had really great hair, but she and her husband also produced it. And this particular episode is called A Sister's Love. And it has a great backstory of how it came to be aired, and most importantly, it was a child's view of race. So the podcast goes on to detail the fact that the plot is the character Tabitha, Samantha's daughter, has inherited her mother's witch DNA. We know that. Tabitha also has an African-American friend who is the daughter of a work colleague of her father. Remember, Darren worked for McMahon and Tate ad agency. Dads wearing suits, wives preparing dinner so that company could come over and nurture business relationships. It's a bit of a time capsule, a sexist time capsule. But the special episode, with this special introduction by Montgomery, is incredibly relevant. And it's sweet, and it's rare. It aired only on TV once and can be found on dailymotion.com. So if you Google Bewitched, A Sister's Love, watch it, and then you'll agree with me that that episode captured, totally embodied the meaning not just of Christmas, but of peace on earth. Or listen to the podcast, or do both, please. Holidays. That's sort of it. Sitcoms, the longer running ones at least, tend to dabble in other holidays and themes too. Thanksgiving, New Year's maybe. Mother's Day isn't so much the plot of any show as it is an opportunity for American culture wonks to discuss the great moms of TV. It's a predictable list you see on Facebook each May. But count on Advanced TV Herstory to look beyond the predictable. That's why we're advanced. This year, with a tribute to Florence Henderson, who played the quintessential TV mom, the American mom known the world over, Carol Brady, we walked right past the smile and the entertainment magazine pablum. There was so much more to this woman that the entertainment media really never explored. And all I'll say is that they did us a disservice. Americans have no idea of the cultural impact of the Brady Bunch, both in our own 50 states, but also as it's been aired in hundreds of countries. But Henderson knew, and now she and her Wessonality are gone. Rest in peace, good woman, but listen to this podcast. Now, depending upon what your day looked like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or aughts, your knowledge of daytime TV may be iffy, and that's okay. It's a busy world out there. Now, there's Big D daytime, which is the more sophisticated word for serial dramas or soap operas that aired on TV since day one, and they sprung from the loins of radio. This year, we reveled in great conversation about daytime dramas. We, you ask? I spent a fantastic morning in an exhausting conversation with someone who loves TV as much as I do. Dr. Elena Levine from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Levine is currently writing a comprehensive tome, yes, that's right, a tome, on daytime dramas, particularly their impact on major societal issues like birth control, abortion, rapes, interracial relationships, and all of that. The timing of our visit was near the passing of two iconic daytime showrunners. We literally paused a moment in mourning for Claire Labine and Agnes Nixon. These women were showrunners before the role existed, and they gave us the big important shows like Ryan's Hope and All My Children, respectively. So we carved that conversation into two sections, and Levine then shared her experience of visiting with Nixon a few years back. But we all know that the daytime TV landscape has changed mightily in 60 years, some for the good. Frankly, is there anything more escapist than watching reruns of Match Game 74? And some for the not so good. Advanced TV Herstory owes a debt to the many cultural, gender, and media studies professors and students who listen and contribute to this podcast. Joining Dr. Levine in the probe for societal meaning of what gets aired during the day on TV were my guests Dr. Kathleen Rosano and Lubna Scali. Their topic and book, Vulture Culture, The Politics and Pedagogy of Daytime Television Talk Shows, was the topic of one podcast. They, along with their colleague Christine Quayle, had researched and digested, or should we say maybe indigested, the spectacle of rowdy audience talk shows. You know the ones, Maury Povich and Jenny Jones, to name two, but also the judge shows, where two sides mix it up in the TV set courtroom and then receive a lecture from the judge. All these shows involved women, and as we now get close to 20 years of hindsight from this genre's heyday, the misogyny and the subliminal messaging, listen to the clips and it all starts to come back to you. It will make you want to take action, any action, some action. But most importantly, this podcast installment provides yet another example of how TV has bred toxicity that has resulted in our polarized country. So perhaps in another life, I would have become a professor of media or cultural studies. But with a background in communications, public relations, and leadership, I believe that there's power in discussing and sharing the best work from this field. So if you're a professor or student at any stage of research who wants to talk women in and of TV, please send me a note. Your research and passion are welcome here. Because in academia, the new mantra should be publish, podcast, or perish. Yeah. Regular listeners know that all too often in creating content, the backstory or explaining the significance of an event in TV herstory, we need to set the benchmarks, usually from the 70s, usually to include the fight for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment and the implementation of Title IX. Another is the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade, which secured a woman's reproductive rights. Now, since TV networks are overwhelmingly run by men, and always have been, it's no surprise that there have been few attempts to incorporate a woman's right to self-determination, her right to make her own medical decisions, into TV plots. We just don't go there. When any issue about women's health becomes a plot twist, watch for the trope. It's not always there, but it's very frequent. And that's that things get pretty condescending pretty quickly. But aren't you amazed that we, women, are still largely defaulted to for the uncompensated care of our aged and young, making life and death decisions for them, but not for ourselves? No, we haven't advanced on this nearly as much as we think we have. But this year, Advanced TV Herstory looked in depth at two depictions. China Beach, one of my very favorites, the TV series that aired 1988 to 1991, the one about the U.S. medical unit set in Vietnam, starring Dana Delaney and Marg Helgenberger. War Through the Eyes of Women. Our installment entitled China Beach Tackles the Topic was my way of avoiding the trolls, the online trolls that would have found the topic, to bring you a bit of understanding about this seminal episode. Ricky Lake, in Season 2, plays an aid worker facing an unplanned pregnancy. The plot was rich and philosophical, and very well delivered. It was one of Helgenberger's most raw performances. She and her character found their voice in that episode, and the installment gives you a lot to think about. So to understand the rationale behind ensuring, through legal means, a woman's right to make her own decisions about her body is to know the story of Romper Room's Miss Shari, which was the topic of yet another podcast installment. Romper Room was a national TV show for preschool baby boomers, and it began back in the early 60s. Miss Shari hosted the show that aired in the Arizona markets. And really, she wasn't a miss. She was a mother of 4 who, early in her pregnancy with child number 5, took the powerful drug thalidomide with the understanding that it would ease her morning sickness. Weeks later, she learned that her fetus was experiencing gross malformation due to that drug. Her whole story, the decisions at that time which were not hers to make, they were everyone else's. They were the hospital administrators, her employers, a judge. That story is told in a made-for-TV movie called A Private Matter, starring Sissy Spacek. No one got rich off of making that movie, but listen to this podcast, and maybe you'll understand how real life is often real news. And then hug your mom or your kids, or if you're alone when you're listening, reassure your uterus or its former home that you've got this. You are in charge. Now, some people shy away from politics, but TV is filled with political thought and influence. It is there, and we need to talk about it. And politics, is dominated by men in real life and on TV. So one look at the work of the United States Senate, however, this year, the real one, shows us that women represent diverse thought in a male-dominated world of policymaking and can make a difference. But statistics about representation in state legislatures and the U.S. Congress mirror, actually, the statistics about the representation of women in TV. And both show us that there is a lot of work to be done. So in the realm of politics, that's not just in getting women interested in running for office and getting elected. It's in being valued for their service and their ideas and their principles. So where do we get our role models for women in politics if they aren't on TV and there are so few of them in real life? As last year's presidential race occupied headlines, this podcast revisited Geena Davis's 2005-2006 one season of a show called Commander-in-Chief. There's an in-depth look as well at Rosie O'Donnell's use of her voice and position to defend others. And finally, we show how the TV show Maude, who was TV's first feminist, played by the incomparable Bea Arthur, challenged the status quo of the early 70s, thanks to Norman Lear. We also talked about political reporting with TV writer Susan Silver, and more recently delved into the early careers of these famed women TV journalists, Barbara Walters, Leslie Stahl, and Connie Chung. They were the first women to gain national TV prominence as reporters because of Watergate. Why were their careers important? Again, it gets back to what we see on TV. Because women had never reported serious news like politics before on national TV. That's why. All of a sudden, Watergate came along. But before Watergate, they were relegated to the women's beat. So, in 1972, at the start of what would turn out to be 2-year-long scandal that resulted in President Nixon's resignation, that situation created so many reporters chasing so many different stories that the women's beat, which was kind of fashion, household trends, feel-good stories, there was no time for it. Chung, Walters, and Stahl were in the thick of it. And aren't we the lucky ones that these three built illustrious careers that have been recorded in print and video? These women, then and now, are the models for teenagers and journalism students. There's no ready place on TV for us to learn about the women in and of TV. If you've listened to a single episode of Advanced TV Herstory, you've heard me rattle off lists of video segments available on YouTube. METV Legends has a channel on YouTube, and it's the most comprehensive archive of important conversations available. I love METV Legends. So between that channel and the Biography channel, and Behind the Music on MTV, and a host of random interviews that have been posted by regular people, some literally digitally recorded off of a VHS that you can just see on their TV, I'm amazed at the stuff about women's lives that just never has reached the eye or ear. Thus, career profiles are really important to fulfilling Advanced TV Herstory's mission. Because Shari Lewis had a tremendous impact on children's television and was as successful at reinvention as Madonna, and died way too young of uterine cancer. So fellow podcaster Dwight Hurst and I, Dwight is a mental health practitioner and works with kids, we talked about how Shari connected with kids and parents. Shari Lewis created a big deal footprint in TV herstory, even if I'm the only one to say it. Nod yes if you agree. Marlene Forte is one of the few working actresses I interviewed. You might wonder what a woman entering what we hope is a rapid rise in her career can contribute to TV herstory. Aren't we about the past? Well, Cuban-born Marlene has endured a career of being the extra in many, many dramas and sitcoms, usually the weeping Latina mother of a dead child. Her characters are powerless, her lines few. And that's a norm that has gone unchallenged for decades. The powerless Latina. That's changing for Marlene, and I am so grateful that she described how and why in our interview. Some of our strongest female characters in series from the 70s and 80s uttered words written by TV writers April Smith and Susan Silver. So it was an honor to interview both, listen to their stories, and get a real-world understanding of the creative process as it was employed back then. Both have turned to writing books. So you'll find the Susan Silver book chat listed as her book title, Hot Pants in Hollywood. And I really enjoyed researching the feisty backstory of Dinah Shore, who was far more than arm candy for Burt Reynolds. As a well-liked singer and personality, she literally stood at the door of all of her radio and TV variety shows, making sure that performers of color were welcomed and allowed entry. This was in the 50s and the 60s. Yep, listen in to hear how she used her privilege to ensure airtime for the likes of Pearl Bailey and Mahalia Jackson. There was so much more to Dinah Shore than she ever shared or allowed to have shared. Because she was of the generation, women were lucky to get what they were given. Women became invisible after a certain age. Women didn't share either their personal stories or their secrets to achievement. Lost, lost, lost. What I wouldn't give for an hour of candor from Lucille Ball or Dinah Shore. Let's just grab an iced tea and shoot the breeze out on the patio. Straight talk, knowing that women today need all the wisdom they can get. And so that desire fuels my efforts to obtain interviews with legends who are still alive. Stay tuned for the 3rd year of Advanced TV Herstory, and tell your friends. Okay, formats, categories, finding meaning in the work and words of others, all to bring to life, to audio, facts and perspectives that help us understand the representation of women in TV today. It's a mouthful. But this is a category that I simply call influence. Actually, it's influence and influencers. The common thread you'll find in these installments is influence. Take, for instance, the influence of TV on fashion through the decades. So we started in the early 60s and we worked our way through the short skirts that were found at the workplace of Ally McBeal. Fashion blogger Ann Rosenquist-Fee and I rushed through photos of fashion trendsetters and how women on TV, women like Cher, influenced what was being sold at your local department store or Target. And once upon a time, girls wore clothes that their moms sewed from patterns. That was the 60s. But TV changed how fashion was sold and marketed to girls, in a sense building industries that have become incredibly influential and sophisticated in shaping our culture. So you can't talk about women in and of TV without looking to fashion, which is the whole point of that podcast. And it was a thrill for me to interview feminism influencer, chronicler, advocate, and publisher Melissa Silverstein. The installment that's called Decade of Women in Hollywood was our chat about her 10 years of work around the globe, tracking and reporting on the work around gender and pay gaps, box office statistics, the business side of being a woman in the entertainment business, not just in the U.S., but in all countries where movies and TV are a thing. Women in Hollywood is her powerhouse website. A dozen years ago, author and student of TV Alison Klein penned the book What Would Murphy Brown Do? And it was a comprehensive look at the influence of TV, and vice versa, on culture. So lo and behold, she's attempting the impossible, to bring that analysis up to present day. She explained her reasons why in our interview installment, which bears her book's title. So like I said, it has been quite a year. And as I look at the year ahead, 24, 25, 26 installments of this podcast, I only know that women need all the sustenance and support they can get. We're outnumbered and out-resourced every day on TV. Our voices are marginalized or dismissed on news analysis panels. Reports indicate that sports coverage of women athletes has become more, not less, sexist and racist. We don't have an hour, let alone 2 full days of coverage across numerous channels every weekend, covering the actions of women in and of TV. But picture this, 2 or 3 smart women sitting at the desk with screens and green screens and a telestrator. An hour dedicated to breaking down the reactions of Anita Hill's testimony in 1991 before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Statistics, body language, and context provided by Professor Hill herself. This is what I think about. Or an hour picking up the FX's mini hit series Feud, the one about the lifelong competition between Joan Crawford and Bette Davis, which was stunningly brought to life by Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon. It left off basically with the understanding that we now know that the media moguls fueled the feud. Give yourself a minute and think about the ways that happens. Teen magazines to TMZ, they feed on fake news or photoshopped images, and it normalizes toxic relationships among women and even a toxic relationship with an individual celebrity herself. So where can women go to have that kind of analysis and understanding, to cut through the clutter, to find the truth? Until such time as that sort of show reaches TV, rest assured you'll find it here at Advanced TV Herstory. Subscribe on Google Play, iTunes, and Auto Radio. Play it directly on your device on Player FM, Libsyn, or our podcast website, www.tvherstory.com. Know this, listeners, your recommendations mean the world to me, and helping someone, a new listener, master the easiest way for them to listen, by golly, it's the greatest compliment. If women ran the podcasting world. Finally, here's the deal. I've invited you to contact me, and I mean it, really. Send me the name of the series or episode that opened your eyes or changed your life, and why. Our Twitter handle is at TV Herstory, our email, advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. As the third year of production begins, sure, we've got a list of fun and important topics. This is the stuff that I thoroughly enjoy. But as we've experienced in this past year, no one knows what tomorrow will bring. We do know that women need to band together to educate, celebrate, and fortify one another. Please be a part of this important conversation. This is why I podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.